And we're up to about 1945.
1945.
Okay. Let's go ahead and we'll finish how you acquired the house, but after that I want to stop and I want to talk about my mom when she was a kid.
Sure.
Obviously, I was not there.
No,
Okay?
not yet.
Okay, go ahead then. Finish about, you were just saying that you kept money out for a lawyer.
We kept money out for a lawyer, and that protected us legally. And then by that time, we moved from the house we were living in on Westfield Avenue in Rahway. We moved down to this big old house on Leesville Avenue. And let me tell you, it was a big old house, and it had stood idle for almost a year. And when we got in there, I looked and I looked and I looked and I says, well, let's start all over again, girls, start all over. But this time you're doing it for yourselves.
Do you know what year the house was built in?
Yes, I do. They gave me the deed to the house. They gave me the papers of where they had bought all the material and how much it cost. Actually, if you counted the floored attic, which you could have made 3 rooms and a bath out of, that house had 11 rooms. The window panes were the bevel windows that when the sun struck them, there were rainbows all over the house. And we had beveled glass halfway in all the doors. The lumber came from someplace in New York State, and how much it cost. The knobs were all crystal knobs on the door, and where they came from and how much they cost. And who had done the plastering, it was lath and plaster in those days, and who done that and how much that cost. Well, that big home on 200 frontage property and 185 feet deep cost in 1884 $640, and it was built on a foundation of cobblestones that was 5.5 foot thick.
Doesn't that contrast today to my $652 a month mortgage payment?
Time I nearly die, honey, when I think of what you kids have to pay to live in a house. It breaks my heart because it should not
Do
be.
you know that I'm making these tapes now so that in the future, 100, 200 years down the road, hopefully somebody in the family will be able to look back at them now, and when they laugh at my $652 a month because they're paying $60,000 a month for mortgage.
Yeah, so anyway, this is the way that started, and we really did, when we went in, it was a large living room, and like I say, they had beautiful glass in the windows. It was a joy to clean them and put curtains and shades up. And the poor soul who had lived in the house was she wasn't a widow lady. She had never married, but the house had been left to her by a relation whose last name was Mossman. No, she was a widow. She married late in life, but her husband died shortly after they were married. Her name was Anne Farley. And after she died, the house stood idle for a long time because nobody wanted a great big house like that. And I loved it. And every one of my children and grandchildren who got a chance to come down there and stay with me even overnight, they have always talked about the big old white house. David, your brother David, he said, Grammy, you want to go down and go past it again. Your big old white house that everybody loved. And even Sis, when she and Tom moved to Oregon and they bought that big old white house at the foot of the mountain, Ma, she said, every time I go in and out the front door, I feel like I'm going in and out of the house on Leesville Avenue. So we must have left a good impression of that big old house because we really fixed it up pretty, Tom. And then, of course, Grandpa was a gardener, and gradually I had rose gardens, and he had a vegetable garden, and we boxed up the well so that nobody would fall in it like that little girl did. And we planted a split rail fence all the way along the front, made it look like country property. And when we went into that house, you won't believe it, a girlfriend of mine came down to help. She was thrilled to death that we had found a home. And between Grace Large, that was her name, because she married a young friend of ours, we pried off at the living room floor 5 rugs that had been nailed down, not with nails, spikes. The poor old soul that lived there, I guess she was freezing cold. And we got them all out, and eventually I got down and I scrubbed that old wooden floor. The planks were like that till they were almost white like this carpet. And then one day I got ready and I went uptown and I said, oh, I got to do something about that floor besides throw rug. So I brought home some stain and varnish, and I moved all the furniture, moved all the big furniture over to one half, did one half, made sure it was dry, moved all the furniture back again, did the other half, moved it. And I did that twice to the furniture till I just stained it and varnished it. And then I had put my rugs out and shook them real good. I didn't shake them in the house like that girl does on TV. And then I laid the throw rugs down, and they were pretty. And I had lace curtains at the windows, and I used to draw the shades down to keep the hot sun from making the house hot. And finally I found my own air conditioning. When we cleaned the furnace out after the winter, I went down one day into the cellar, and it was lovely and cool down there, just like air conditioning. And I opened the door and looked inside the furnace, and I said, it's all ready for the winter time. But I didn't shut the door. I left it wide open. And I went upstairs, and all of a sudden I walked into the living room, and I said, boy, you know what? It feels like I have air conditioning in here. I had left the furnace door open, and the cool air from the cellar was being vacuumed up through the register in the living room, and I had air conditioning, and it wasn't costing me a penny. And all the 10 and a half years I lived there, I did that every summer, Tom. So see, sometimes when you go down to do one job and you automatically do something else and forget to shut the door, I really found my own air conditioning system, and it was beautiful. A man came to the door one day with his wife. He was selling the Pathfinder magazine. I don't know if it's published anymore or not, but I took it for years because it was an old-fashioned magazine, and it kind of dealt with a lot of my earlier life. And they came to the front door and rang the bell, and I knew it was a stranger because everybody came in through the side screen porch. I went to the door, and they were 2 nice people. And he said, my wife and I, he said, are trying to get subscriptions to the Pathfinder magazine. He said, I had a heart attack, and I'm allowed to work, but it has to be this kind of work anymore so that it doesn't sap all my strength. Oh, I said, please come in. I said, I used to take it for years, but we've been so busy fixing this house up that I said, I must have forgotten that the subscription ran out. Well, I had gone out and picked a big bouquet of lilies of the valley and 1 rose in my garden and put them on top of the radio, the television. No, that wasn't even thought of then. Television? And I had drawn the shades down, and of course the lilies of the valley have gorgeous perfume, and just the sun filtering through these beveled glass windows made like soft rainbows. And of course my home was nice. I always made a lot of things, covers for the furniture and everything. And they sat down, and we had a big fireplace, and a beautiful oil painting over it that a friend of mine had made and given to me. And the man said to his wife, "You know," he said, "I have never walked into a home like this that made me feel like I had just walked into church." So he said, "May we just say a little prayer for you?" And I said, "Sure." I don't recall what he said because he said it low. And then it was all over, and I said, "Well, thank you so much." I said, "That was such a nice thing to say to me," because I said, we have really worked so hard in this home, and I feel like we must have done something nice when a stranger came to my door and said that, and I still feel that way about it. So they got up and went, and I took the subscription for years afterwards.
Shortly after you moved into the house, your husband died.
Yes, we were there. We moved in. We bought it the day before my birthday, the 24th of January, the 25th, and we were supposed to have gone into the house in April, but the people we bought it from, through the real estate agent, said, "Well, why not let them go in?" The only thing that held us up was the people who were supposed to go into the house that I was in. No, I'm getting lost now, honey. No, that's not right. But anyway, I'm thinking about when I sold the house, but no, I've gotten it twisted now. No, that wasn't it. But he said, "Leave them go in now." So we went in the house instead of waiting until April. We went into the house in February, and we did a lot of hard work there. To get everything organized, and we were in February, March, April, May, June, July, August. We weren't there quite 7 months. No, we were only there 5 months, honey, because we were married 21 years the 1st of August, and he died on the 7th.
My birthday.
Your birthday.
August 7th.
And you know, it seems strange, Tom, but every one of my grandchildren have a birthday, and it came when I lost somebody in my family. Now, Richard's mother died the 28th of February, and Denise was born on the 28th of February. So this is oldest girl, and somebody else we know in the family, Mom died the 9th of August, and someone in our, Mom's brother Bill in DeLayer, New Jersey, died on her birthday, the 9th of August. So we have a birth and we have a death with somebody whose birthday came years later. And I just figured that it was God's way of replacing somebody on his good old earth. That's the way I look at that.
How was it? Now, you just got in a big old house, and Mom and Aunt Sis probably had just about finished high school at the time.
Your mother had already graduated,
Right.
and Aunt Sis had graduated because we went to school to see her graduate from high school, and it was so hot we nearly died. It really was. They didn't have air conditioning and anything then. And we got home and we took some pictures because it was still light. We had daylight saving for years. And then he had to go with somebody he worked with whose uncle had these chalets up in Vermont and those New England states. And his uncle was a very, very old man, and he was getting so he couldn't travel, so he had this nephew go up there and do this work for him. And he asked Richard to go along. So I said, "Well, how about when your vacation comes?" Well, he said, "I'll only be gone a week." And they said, "Well, come home and then we'll all go someplace." Well, someplace we didn't know, but we'd make up where it was. I had no idea where we were going to go. So while he was gone, and so far as I know, Tom, as I could ever find out, from the death certificate, and the man who called me, I guess he was the doctor, because he asked for Grandpa Toto. He said, "Can I speak to Frank Toto, please?" We had all gone to bed, and the phone rang, and I ran all the way downstairs and through all these rooms to the den, and I picked it up. "Hello, hello. May I speak to Frank Toto?" I said, "Oh," I said, "he went to bed." I said, "He was very tired tonight," and I said, "He does a lot of garden work," but I said, "I'll go get him. Can you give me the message?" "No," he said, "I have to talk to him." Well, Grandpa's brother had come up from Philadelphia. He'd been in the hospital, his brother Theodore, and he'd been in the hospital and come up and stayed with us till we ran out of medicine, and he said, "I better go back and get some medicine." And then he said, "I'll come back," and he said, "If there's anything I can do," because he was a bricklayer and a mason like Grandpa. And he left and had gone, and I said, "Oh, Grampy's brother," to myself. I said, "Well, hold the phone and I'll run up." And I ran all the way back to Grampy's room, and I said, "Grampy, hurry up, get up. There's a man wants to talk to you on the phone." "Oh," he said, "my brother. I'll bet my brother got real sick. If your brother got real sick, I'll have someone come in and stay with the girls, and I'll go to Philadelphia with you." I figured maybe his brother, was real bad, and he was going to, you know how you feel that way. So he went to the phone, and I sat on the arm of the big Morris chair. And yes, and I assumed he was saying who he was. And he said, "No, no." And then there was another 2 yeses. And he said to me, "It's really for you, Violet." "No," I said, "the man asked for you, Grandpa." And he said, "But it's really for you." And Grandpa handed me the phone, and he was shaking like that. Well, I figured because I got him up so fast, he was nervous. And I picked the phone up, and I said, my husband's stepdad answered the phone. That was the Frank Toto you asked for. And he said, "Yes," he said, "I know I asked for him, but," he said, "your husband died. Listen to this. Your husband died at 9 o'clock tonight. Give me the name and address of your undertaker." Can you imagine getting a message like that over the phone, Tom? For a minute, I was so quiet inside. It was like, like I tell you, everything happens to Grandma. So I said, "You're mistaken." I said, "We all went to the railroad station to see him off." I said, to where he was going in Vermont with a friend he worked with. And I said, he was well. He had just passed a physical again. "Well," he said, "he died at 9 o'clock tonight. What's the name of your undertaker?" And he was real snotty. And I gave him Mr. Flynn's telephone. Imagine, it came right out. And I said, "That's his name, and he's in Perth Amboy, and that's his telephone number." Well, he said, "You get in touch with him." And he said, "I will, right away, and you get in touch with him. Give me 15 minutes on the phone." And he said, "You get in touch with him and call him," he said, "and I'll ask him how to get down there with your husband's body." So I hung up, and I said to Grandpa, "Did you know that?" He said, "That's why he told me." And he said, "I knew it was you that he..." Oh, I said, what a way to tell anybody something. So I said, "Well, I'll give him 15 minutes, and then I'll call Mr. Flynn in Perth Amboy." And he said, "Well, Violet," he said, "there's nothing I can do right now." He said, "But I'll be up at 7 o'clock in the morning to get details." And he said, he's going to be there at some time in the early afternoon. And he said, when he comes, he said, and he's gone, then he said, I'll come back up here and get you. And so that's the way it transpired. And then, of course, I left a couple of real close friends know right away. And Well, the girls were prostrated, you know. They were beside themselves, but they were very good, Tom. Both your mother and Aunt said they held up wonderful. And I did too. I couldn't cry. I couldn't cry. This is my problem. If I could cry, it washes away everything, and I feel, but I tighten all up inside like a knot, and it won't untie for me. So we had that, and then we called a lot of old friends that we'd known for years, and they all came, and I figured the best place to buy. I had previously bought a lot in the Cloverleaf Cemetery in Woodbridge, because the girl's husband that lived next door to us at that time they built a new firehouse in the town above Rahway. And he wanted to be the first one to put the flag on the new flagpole when the sun came up, 4 o'clock in the morning. And he shinnied up the pole with the flag, and the pole broke and went through him and threw him to the roof, and the impact threw him to the ground, and he was instantly killed. And a couple of times she asked me to go to the cemetery with her. And so I was down there one day, and the fellow said to me, we have some lots for sale. He said, would you be interested? Well, see, our folks were all buried down south or in South Jersey, and I kind of figured it was a long trip for an undertaker to take, 2.5 hour drive. So I said to him, how much do you want for a lot? He said, well, we have 8 graves. And he said, they're going for $150. And Eleanor said to me, the girl I'd gone down there with, she said, I got caught, she said, never thinking anything like that was going to happen to Ed so soon. And she said, they charged me $500 for a 2-grave thing. She said, Violet, she said, it's a buy. So I said to him, I'll tell you what, can you hold it till tomorrow? And I'll let you know. I went home and I counted I used to do a lot of sewing, you know, for other people. And I always put it in a teapot that had a broken spout. I said, I'll go home, and I said, I'll speak to my husband about it and see what he thinks. But I knew I was going to buy that thing myself with my own money. And I went home and I told him, and he said, you're crazy. You're crazy. He said, what are you thinking about buying a cemetery plot? Well, I said, you never know, Richard. I said, you never know. And I said, it's a long way down there to New Camden or Baltimore, where your dad's buried. So I said, I'm going to buy it myself. So I counted what I had in my teapot, took it to the bank, exchanged it for dollar bills, called the fellow up, and Eleanor took me down. And I said to him, I had $90. I said, could I have 2 months to get the other 60 together? He said, sure. So in 2 months, I made $60 sewing, and I went down there and I paid it, and I brought the deed back, and I said, see that? That's good for 99 years. So Alan, while Richard was away, Alan had used our car, and I said to him, let's go down to what's those people make all the ice cream there? Oh, gee whiz. Honey, it's like your ice cream places out here. They're very popular. So we went down to Woodbridge, and it's a clover leaf, and you got to go all the way around all the leaves, you know, to get to it's a restaurant, and they sell 21 different kinds of ice cream. So we got we took 2 half gallons and was coming home, and we're going around one of these leaves, you know, across from the cemetery, and Alan says out loud, where are those lots you bought? I said, back over there, beyond the clover leaf itself, because then every branch has got a name, like the oak leaf, the maple leaf, this leaf, the willow leaf. And I said, we were in the oak leaf section.
No, is that
So-
where my grandfather's buried?
Yes.
In that cemetery?
So Alan said, this is exactly what Alan Young said to me. I wonder what poor damn fool's going to be the first one to lay in there. Richard. Then Alan. Laura wanted Alan buried, in our family plot. And I said, have you ever thought of that, Laura? And then, of course, Grandpa always said, please bury me with the family that has always been so kind to me. Yeah, he said, I have always been treated like a real relative. So I said, well, Grandpa, what do you do? People live with you? That's the way you treat them.
Okay, we haven't spoken about my mom.
Yeah.
When she was a little kid. I
Uh,
don't really know a whole lot about her.
Well,
back
honey,
then.
both of the girls, I only had the two girls, but both of the girls, Tom, grew up to be fine young ladies. As children, they were cross my heart, they were no problem to me at all. They grew up to be real nice, and whenever they went to a party, my phone would ring the next day. Mrs. Tribull, yes, your daughters are always welcome in my home. I have never met two girls who were such lovely ladies. They had good manners, they were polite, they were nice, they never were rowdy or anything. You never got any reports like that from them, about them. So I felt kind of proud about my daughters. And like I said, I have dearly loved every one of my grandchildren, and each one has a special place in my heart for one special thing that I noticed about all. Each is different, but that special thing registered in my heart for each and every one.
Okay.
No, they were good. They went to school, they studied, they got good marks, and of course Laura took what do they call it, a commercial course. So when she graduated from high school, we wanted her to go on, and she said, no, Ma, she said, I learned everything I had to learn in general office practice, shorthand, typing, all that. Well, Sis thought she wanted to go on to college. So when she graduated, some fella came from someplace, and we registered her in I guess it was Newark State, because she had to go to Newark to go to college, and we paid her tuition for 6 months ahead of time. But then when that was done, she said, Ma, I have to quit college. She said, look, I can see ahead of me it's going to be a hard thing for you to keep the house going and pay. So she got a job working in a place where Laura used to work during the summer vacations, and then finally she got a very good job at Coos Brothers.
Okay, let's go back now.
Your mother worked for a man. She worked for lawyers and judges. No, she worked for lawyers, and Mr. Barger was a lawyer in Rahway. She worked for him, and he became mayor of the city of Rahway. Later, he was appointed as a judge in the courts, the Elizabeth courts, and Laura said he always told me that he trusted me. He let me make my own paycheck out. And she said he was very nice to work for.
Let's go back now. Okay, we've spoken about my grandfather dying, and then we went back, reflected a little bit on Mom's childhood.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here you were, your daughters were pretty well grown up at the
Yes.
time, but there was you in this big house, and you had just bought it, so it was not paid for.
No.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about that, what
Well,
you did?
A very, very old friend of mine who was, well, I always say she was rather well-to-do. She was left to be a widow, and she was going to go live with her daughter in one of the Midwestern states after her husband died. And she said to me, Mrs. Tribull, she said, you have a great big home here. She said, and you know, out in the business world, she says, is very different from when you used to go when you were younger. She said, keep your house if you can. So she recommended some woman, and I called her up, and I took 2 girls in from the Janet Memorial Home. I took Vivian Rydstrom, who was 8, had been placed in this home because her mother and father were both alcoholics, and they put her brother with somebody else, and she never found out who had her baby sister. And I had Vivian 2 years, and I made application again to get a girl the same age as Vivian, and that was Carol McKay, and but she was very different. Now, she came out of a home where there was alcoholics, both the mother and the father, but this child had become very disoriented with all that stuff going on, where Vivian had accepted the changes in her life, and she asked me if she could call me Mom, and I said, you certainly can. And I had her 5 years. I had Carol 5 years, all but a couple of months. But in the meantime, your grandfather was a Mason, belonged to the Masonic Lodge. And I met someone uptown, and they said to me, there's a couple of men in the lodge are looking for a place to board, but they want to be in a private home. So I figured I had the 2 little girls in the 1 big bedroom, and I could use the day bed that I had all made up in a fancy couch with pillows, and I slept down there, and I had got Uncle Tom to get me doors, like real heavy doors like this, and put them across the archway from the living room into the den. And he put them up for me, and I could lock them at night, and everybody had to go through the front door because you'd come in the den off of the porch and have to walk through there. And then I had a doorway like that, closed off the main hallway for anybody going upstairs. So eventually, Marie Large stopped by one day to see me, and she said, Aunt Vi, she said, you know I'm a commercial nurse. She had graduated from nurses training, and she said, Standard Oil over in Linden, she said, are looking for places for men in private homes to board, because she said in Pennsylvania the work is so bad that there's nobody working over there, but they want the men to live in private homes. She said, let me put an ad up on the board, and she said, I'll get you 4 or 5 men here. You won't mind? No, I said, as long as they behave themselves. There will be a rule here. They have to come to my table with the shirt on. I don't want no bare chest. And I said, I'll give them all a key, and when they come in at night, they can go where they want to, but I said they have to behave themselves here. No roughhousing. Go up quietly to their rooms. That's all I ask. They will get 3 good meals a day, a big breakfast, I'll pack a lunch, and a good big supper at night. They can listen to the radio. There still was no TV then, till 9 o'clock at night. But I said, because I have to get up at 5:15 to get everything ready for breakfast so that they can get out by 7:30. I said, I don't care where they go after 9 o'clock as long as they come in quietly. And believe it or not, they never complained. They got a big breakfast, bacon and eggs, toast and coffee. And the next morning it would be 3 different kinds of cereal. I put it out, put all the milk, the butter. I used to put a whole loaf of bread out in a tray and tell them, toast your own bread so it's nice and warm. I had 3 big white coffee pots on my coal range. My coffee was always made fresh. And I said, you have to help yourself. If you want 3 cups, there's plenty there. And I never had any trouble with any of those boys, young men they were. Never had any trouble with them. And he didn't work for Standard Oil. He came in afterwards when one of the fellows went back home. Then Standard Oil was starting to lay them off. And 2 of them were from South Carolina. And the fellow said he was going to quit anyway. He wanted it back in 10 bar down there. I said, you're making $350 a week and you're going to go back, I said, and work for $50 a week? Why don't you look around up here? Not that I want you to stay here if you don't want to stay. Oh, he said, no, he said, I was very well pleased. He said, I really got good food here. So I thought, well, that was an asset anyway. So he had to go back to collect his pay. And I said to him, Bill, I said, you didn't pay me week before last, and you didn't pay me last week. Now, I said, I'm not in the boarding house business for fun. I said, it's a way I chose to make a living because I have such a big home. So I said, just leave your suitcases right there on the floor. And when you come back, I said, stop by and have a cup of coffee. I said, I will have finished baking a chocolate layer cake, and you're welcome to have coffee and cake. Now, this is after he ate a big breakfast. So he put his suitcases down. I called Hope Benson in the telephone, and I said, Hope, this is Mrs. Tribull. Oh, Mrs. Tribull. See, she went to school with your mother and answered. And I said, honey, I have a problem. I said, one of my boarders is going to leave to go down south. He hasn't paid his wages, his board for 2 weeks, and he made 5 long-distance calls on my telephone. Hope, I said, is it any trouble to ask you to look up how much those 5 calls cost? So she said, you hold your phone, she said, I'll be back in less than 5 minutes. She came back and she said, the calls come to $16.80, Mrs. Tribull. I said, that and 2 weeks' board he owed me. So when he came in, I said, Bill, I said, I called the telephone people up. I said, you remember you made 5 long-distance calls on my phone. That's not included with your board. And I said, you owe me 2 weeks' board plus the $16.80 for your telephone. So I said, if you don't mind, I'd like to be paid. I said, I did feed you. I loaned you my telephone. And I said, I think I'm entitled to it. So I said, if you'd like to come out and have a cup of coffee and a piece of chocolate layer cake, it's all done. So I said, I sure would. And he said, I'll remember that. So he laid the money on the table. If he'd have taken his suitcases, I would have never seen that. And I would have had the $16.80 that he rung up on my long-distance phone. So he picked up his suitcases and he looked at me and he said, well, thank you. He said, I really had a nice home to live in, but he said, I will also tell you something. You're a smart businesswoman. So I just want to let you know Grandma was no dum-dum. And I...
When you had your boarders, eventually, now, I remember, at least as a kid, you working in the laundromat.
Yes.
Ever since I was a little kid, I remember that. Did you, and I also remember the apartment. Now, I think I was born when you were living in the big house still, if I'm not mistaken, because I vaguely remember being in the car once and going over there when you were actually moving into the apartment. I was born in 57.
57.
And I don't know when you sold the house.
Well, it had to be around that time, honey, because, see, Grandpa died September the 6th in 57, and I put the house up for sale, and the first people got it didn't sell it, though I went back to Bower & Brooks and they sold it for me. So, yeah, it had to be 57, honey, because I went to California. I worked 10 years in the laundromat, and I was 67 and a half when I went to California to be with your mother.
Maybe I'm mistaken that because I would have only been a year old, and I doubt I'd remember.
Yeah, I think you were a wee tot then.
So you decided to sell the house.
Yes.
And
I sold it.
And then is that when you went to work at the laundromat?
At the laundromat, yes.
Why did you sell the house?
Because, Tom, I was the last one there. I was living in that great big home all by myself because Standard Oil laid off and all those men went back, all but one. And he got a job working for the post office, and he lives on Longfellow Drive in Rahway yet.
Okay, so you sold the house and you moved into an apartment on University Terrace in Linden, where we were all living at the time.
Yes,
And you were working at
the laundromat
Sudstown.
in Raleigh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about working at Sudstown, and tell me also any amusing story, not in too much detail.
No,
but
no.
any amusing story about when you worked there.
Well, I went into work there. At first, I have to tell you this because that's how I happened to get that job. There used to be a man stop by our door every once in a while for dry cleaning, and it saved me walking all the way uptown, so I give him to Max Golob. That was his name, and he always brought him back. And now I got to tell this right, because this is how I got that job. Somebody told me I could get a job in Merck's. It was a good place to work. So I went there and made application, and the woman told me, she said, due to your age, she said, you couldn't get a pension if you worked in Merck's.
How old were you at the time?
Well, I was 45, and you have to work 25 years in Merck's to draw a pension. And she said it would be beyond the age if you worked. So she said, we try to hire people within an age bracket so that they can benefit from the bonus that they get after they work for Merck's for 25 years. Well, I understood it, and I thanked her very much. So I stopped at Uncle Tom's. I was all dressed up nice. I had a little black suit and a white blouse and a little black hat, black shoes and a black purse. And I stopped at Uncle Tom's on Elizabeth Avenue across from Weetina. You know where that was, though. And I said, I'm going to go in and make believe I'm hunting for a job. I stopped at Castoria on Elizabeth Avenue. They weren't going to hire until June. Well, I said, if I can get a job before June, I will. But anyway, I walked in, and Uncle Tom wasn't there. And the fellow who came out of the mill part of it, because Uncle Tom had a big woodworking business there. And I said, is Mr. Ladany here? And he said, no. He said he went out to get a load of lumber. Well, I said, I heard that he wanted a bookkeeper. So I said, can I wait for him? Never cracked a smile. And the guy didn't know me from a hill of beans. So I said, well, you can sit down there and wait. He says, because I have to go back in the mill. That's all right. I said, I'll wait for him. I know him. So I guess I waited about a half an hour. And I kind of turned this way so that anybody coming through the door out of the mill wouldn't know who I was, all dressed up. So I saw Uncle Tom's car pull around the driveway and go to the back, and he went into the mill from the back. So they must have told him there was a woman out in the office looking for a job, and I still didn't turn around. And I don't think Uncle Tom had ever seen me dressed the way I was. So he came in and he said, good afternoon. He said, may I help you? I said, well, I heard that you needed a bookkeeper here. And I turned around and he said, Ma. Yes, I said, I know the men in your mill didn't know me, and I wasn't going to identify myself. But I said, I got a little bit tired walking. I said, I'd been over to Merck's and I'd stopped at Castoria, and I knew you couldn't get in Weetina because they only hired, if you were a relative, they hired a relative of yours. That's how you got a job in Weetina, and you were there for life. Of course, Weetina's been sold to Quaker Oats in the meantime. But anyway, so I said, gee, I'd hire you, mice, if I really needed one. He said, I'm just breaking you. Oh, I'm only kidding, Tom. I said, I only stopped in here for fun. I wanted to talk to you. So I said, well, come on through the mill, he said, and stay for supper. No, I can't stay for supper, Tom. I said, I'll be back if I can come later. So I said, that'll be fine. So I said, just tell Sis I stopped and said hello. I said, I've got to go home. No, I said, I want to walk home, Tom. I'm kind of walking off a bit of a depression. So I said, I'll go. So I left and I came onto Main Street in Rahway, and I'm just going under the bridge, you know, where the railroad is, at Cherry Street. And I'm really hurrying, and I said to myself, no, I'm going to stop at the fruit market, take home some fruit to the big house. And someone said, Mrs. Tribull, where are you going in such a hurry? And here's Max Golob, the fellow who always picks up the dry clean. Oh, I said, hi, Max. I said, I'm out looking for a job. And I said, I guess I wasn't very lucky today. Merck's can't hire me because of my age. He said, what? I said, well, I'm too old to work there for 25 years, I said, and get a pension. Oh, boy, he said, I can't believe that. And I said, I stopped at Castoria, and I said, they're not hiring until June. He said, you really have to go to, yes, Max, I have to go to work. I said, I got to get out in the business world again. He said, don't bother going for your fruit. He turned me around. He said, go up to the dry cleaners where I always used to take your clothes. That guy's hunting for a woman where a big brand new laundromat's going to open up across from Cruz Brothers on St. George Avenue. Go on up and you tell him Mac Golob sent you. Go on. He said, be a good girl now. He said, they're going to hire over there. So I said, okay, Max, thanks a lot. I said, gee whiz, I said, I was lucky I ran into you. He said, and you'll be hired. I said, well, I will. So I walked back, and I walked in, and a heavy-set woman was there, and I said, Max Golob sent me up here, I said, because he said that the dry cleaner, I said, is hunting for somebody, I said, to work for him. They're going to open up a big laundromat on St. George Avenue. And I said, I have to go to work. So the man came out, and he said, oh, you're Mrs. Tribull. He said, well, I'll tell you what. He said, I'll put you up there in that laundromat, and you collect my dry cleaning. He said, but you have to work 2 half days for nothing here. Come in on Saturday morning, and I'll take you over there.
Okay, we're back. There may have been a slight cut in the tape because we had to change batteries.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now, I remember when you were in Sudstown when I was a little kid. Okay, so I'm probably going to ask you a few little questions
Sure.
about this stuff. Real quickly, basically I know that you worked how many hours a week there?
I worked 6 days a week from 9 to 5.
To 5. And you were the manager.
Yes,
there.
I was.
They
made manager when I worked there 3 months.
Do you ever remember in the 1960s there was a song by some rock group, and I don't even remember the name. And the name of the song was "My Grandmother's the Leader of the Laundromat." Do you ever remember that?
No, Tom, I don't remember it. If I was familiar with it, it's gone out of my mind.
There was a song by that name. It always made me think of you. Real quick, are there any stories, either sad or amusing, that you ever remember happening at the laundromat?
Well, I had a peculiar thing happen. It was the day before Christmas, and the laundromat was loaded. Everybody was coming in, washing and drying, so they knew they were going to have a big load after Christmas. And the day help was supposed to leave at 4 o'clock, and the night help was to come in and work to just 2 hours and then go. Well, some man came in with a lot of money you couldn't put your hands around, and he started to give $20 bills out to kids. And Tom, I didn't like that. I didn't think that was good. So I walked over to them and I said, you give that man back the money he gave you. And I said, you do as I tell you now. And they did. And I went to him and I said, why don't you go home? I said, it's the day before Christmas. Your wife is probably waiting for you to come home with that money so you can go out and Christmas shop for your children. I said, come on now, bud. And I said, come on now, bud. I said, you've got your money. I'll walk you to the door. And I did. And I said, don't come back in here anymore today. And he went. I walked back to the counter because I had to make change. And the one woman said, I think you had a hell of a nerve, she said, to make my... Listen, lady, I said, I brought my children up. I had children, and I brought my children up to never take money from any man. And I said, I know they didn't. And I said, how do you know but what his wife might be waiting at home for him to come home? I said, don't you realize, I said, he was loaded up to the gills. He was drunk. He didn't know what he was doing. So I said, I was polite, though. You got to give me credit. I walked him to the door. I could have called the police, but I didn't want any disturbance in here. So she kind of quieted down, and two firemen were in there drying their clothes, and one of them knew me because he only lived 2 doors from me when I lived on Whittier Street. And he said, boy, Mrs. Tribull, he said, you really handled that nice. So I felt kind of good. It was just the way I'd been taught, honey, and I didn't think that was a good thing for him to do.
No. Were there any other incidents that was the store ever robbed? I know it was broken into a number of times, but did anybody ever threaten you with a gun or anything to rob the place?
Well, when we put a dollar bill changer in, and they put it in through the cellar. Mm-hmm. I mean, they bolted it, and I went in one morning, and there was always a couple in there early, and they started to smile, and I said, I know there's something the matter this morning when you're smiling like that. Well, don't walk over there, Vi. They sawed the dollar bill changer out of the floor. But we never put any more than $50 in there. So I said, well, what's next? They're going to take the roof away, I guess, when I come in someday. So then it was shortly after that. We had that all boarded up. That's when I had white linoleum put on the whole new floor. We couldn't get the kind we had anymore. And this same couple, they lived in the trailer park, you know, and that trailer park there, whatever their name was, I can't even remember that anymore. And they said, you know that they sawed the bottom half of your door into the back room where your dry cleaning hangs. Oh, I said, you gotta be kidding. No, go look by. They couldn't get in through the lock, so they had sawed the bottom half off and got it off of the hinges and gone in, and because they couldn't find the money, they took the softener, that pink stuff that you put in your wash to soften it. They had torn, 45 or 50 of those envelopes up and sprinkled it all over everything in there. And then left a dirty note on the counter inside that room where I used to keep the money box. But you see, we hid the money in a different place, and then I had to call the girl next door if she went off duty, or Olga called me when she knew I'd be in, buy the money boxes at such and such a point, covered with such and such. And this way, I usually had about $250 in my coin box. So this way they didn't get that, but they did some bad things in that laundromat. Terrible things, honey.
Yeah.
And they were Jews, but I will tell you this, Tom, they were wonderful people to work for. Now, they don't believe in Christmas, but Tom Litwin, one of the lawyers, they were all lawyers, he got a ladder and he went out and he bought all kinds of Christmas balls and put them on plastic wire, and he zipped them into the ceiling, and he went out and he bought a big wreath and we put it in the window. Now, if you don't think that isn't being nice and recognizing the fact that you are a Christian and they are Jews, but they wanted to celebrate our Christmas, and Tom Litwin thought the Christian Christmas was a wonderful thing.
Okay. Now, you sold the house
Mm-hmm.
and you moved into a trailer.
Yes.
You didn't live there long, did you?
Less than a year, honey. Less than a year.
Um, we'll
Again,
talk,
something
okay,
suddenly.
yeah. Before we talk about that, did you, other than the problem that you had, now we'll talk about that in a minute, other than the problem you had, did you like living in the trailer? Did you
No.
like it small? It was kind of small after the
It
big
was
house.
a small, one with
I
a
remember
one bedroom.
I remember staying there as a kid. I remember there was that little thing with all the mailboxes out
Yes,
in front and everything. And there was like the white stone parking area with
Yes.
pink and white
It
trailer.
was a pretty trailer. It was pink, and I had a pale yellow kitchen, and I had a beige living room, and the bedroom, well, it was a built-in bed, so I always had a nice spread on it, and I had nice drapes. It was pretty, and it was nice for one person. But you see, I'd always lived in a big home, and that was like boxing me up in a coffin alive.
Now tell us why you moved out of there.
Well, one night some fellow way down the road, I was at the head of the road by the mailbox, but he lived way down at the end of the second road. He came in and he was looped. And he didn't know which way he was going, and instead of turning down the road, he turned in toward my trailer, struck me, threw me out of bed, knocked all my crystal out of my closet, threw my grandfather's clock all the way across this railing between the kitchen and the living room, and knocked the trailer over sideways onto the people's car that had a trailer next to me. And for 6 months, I couldn't find him. He never showed up. Oh, the police were called, and they took me to the station house and registered me in a book. I said, I didn't do anything. I had been to church with your mother to listen to missionaries over there at St. John's, and I had a terrible cold, Tom. And I came back, and I remember I made a cup of hot tea and squeezed lemon juice in it and swallowed it as hot as I could, figuring I'd break the cold right away. And I covered up, and when the next thing I knew, I was laying on the floor. I got struck and thrown out of bed because when the trailer turned sideways, I went that way. So I was insured, and the insurance people came, and they replaced everything they could, and they painted where he scraped the pink, and then I had those gas tanks you have to buy by the tank. They came, and the fellow said to me, let us fix your gas range so that you have to light a match. Before it was automatic. This way you won't have any problem with an explosion or anything. So in the long run, while I got a lot of bouncing around, everybody was very kind. The lady lived across the road in the trailer. She took me in that night, and I slept in her trailer. And you know, Tom, I even forgot I had 2 children. I didn't call them until 9 o'clock the next morning. I was so shook up at what had happened.
So you decided to sell the trailer.
So after it was all fixed, you would have never known there was anything wrong, honey. The insurance. The only thing is I lost beautiful wedding crystal that I highly prize. And I got your sister Carol to paint the flowers on the inside of the face of my grandfather's clock because it seemed like in throwing the clock, it scraped something. It didn't break the glass, but the glass door flew open, and it must have hit something going through the air.
I remember.
And Carol painted it for me, and I remember I laid $15 on the counter, and I said, Carol, when you go, honey, I said, you take the money in the envelope. And afterwards I saw her on a Sunday, and I said, you didn't take your money. She said, Grandma, I just wanted to do something nice to help you. Well, I said, honey, you did, and my grandfather's clock doesn't look like a thing ever happened to it. Listen, my dear, I've been taught to pay for anything anybody does for me, so go get yourself something nice with it. And she did.
Okay.
She took it.
That's when you moved into the apartment on University.
Yeah, then I called your mother and I said, Laura, honey, I can't live here any longer. I said, I'll be a nervous wreck. Everything goes through that driveway. I said, I'm up. sitting on the side of my bed. This time I'm not going to be thrown out. So I said, do you think that Mrs. King would have an apartment there? So she said, Ma, I'll call her right away. And she did. And Hannah Hall was a real estate woman that I took my insurance out of for the trailer. And I told her, I said, Hannah, I said, I've got to sell that place. I said, I've got to get back in the house. I said, if I don't, I said, I'll go bonkers and the kids will have to put me in an insane asylum. I said, I can't live there. It had done something to me that I couldn't make my head settle back where it belonged. And I think I was hurt when I was thrown anyway, Tom. But she said, okay, she said, I've got a man wants to buy a trailer. And she said, how old is yours? I said, it's not quite a year old. And I said, the insurance company, Hannah, did a beautiful job. So she got him and she brought him through. And he said, it's just what I wanted for one person. And he bought it. And I had paid $5,000 for it and paid $30 a month rent to stack it there. And when I sold it, I figured against what I might have paid rent for an apartment, and I only lost $80 in the sale, so that wasn't bad at all. And then I went into the apartment on University, and that was $90 a month. But I had figured everything out with that kind of rent, and $12.50 a month for bus fare. And lots of times I walked home at night if it was nice, and I wasn't too tired. And so I stayed there almost 6.5 years, Tom, until they raised my rent to $109. And honey, I couldn't stretch my wages that far.
I know. And would you tell everybody so that they can be shocked how much money you were making an hour?
$1 an hour.
$1 an hour.
As a manager. I once asked for a raise.
And that was in the 1960s.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I asked for a raise, and they told me that they didn't think I knew what they were really covering. They carried Blue Cross and Blue Shield on me, and I got 2 weeks vacation pay and 2 weeks sick leave pay. Now I could use, if I wasn't sick, which I wasn't only once, I could use that at any time I chose, as long as I left them know so that they could regulate the 2 night girls. And that's why I say they were very wonderful people to work for. And
when the price of the apartment went up, you rented the upstairs of a house just a couple doors down.
2 doors away from where I worked, I had sewed for the grandmother, the mother, and the aunt. Done a lot of dressmaking for them when I lived on Leesville Avenue. So her nephew, and your mother knows who he is, lived down at Seaside Heights, and he came up and he said he was going to fix the upstairs in the house where his aunt lived, Mrs. Dale. And he said, Mrs. Tribull, you know, because we always liked you so much, and all the women folks were so pleased with your sewing, wouldn't you like to take the apartment there? So I said, it depends on what you're going to charge me, because I said, I have to move. I cannot pay the rent that they want now in the apartments. And he said, well, you won't have any bus fare to pay. He said, be honest with me. Well, I said, I don't make big money in the laundromat. It's steady, but I don't make big money. So I said, if I give you $85 a month, would that be all right? He said, just to know that somebody nice was living above my aunt. He said, yes. So I moved in there, and I paid $85, and my rent was sent by check every month, the first of every month to him. And his wife even called me and she said, boy, my husband said, isn't it nice to have something rented where you know the check is coming in for that on the first of the month, every month? She said, we have never run into anybody who pays their bills like that. Well, I said, I appreciate being treated good, so why shouldn't I return it the same way? Okay. See, that's the way it was, Tom.
And that's the last place you lived when you were in New Jersey. Now, in 1967, my mom and dad were divorced.
Yes.
We moved to California. And was it 1968 then that
yes.
you moved to California?
Yes. I was 67 and a half, and it was 68 when I went to your mother wrote and she said, see, they were selling the business. The lit ones were selling Sudstown. They were selling the business, and I said to your mother, I don't feel old enough to retire, and I didn't. But I said, now I'm kind of up a creek. I can't get in Merck's. I said, Castoria had moved, and I said, you can't get in Weetina unless you have a relative there. So she said, Ma, why don't you come on out to California? No more winters, no chopping ice, no shoveling snow. She said, you'll love the winters out here. So I said to myself, why not? So Margaret Parks, a Scotch girl that was my night worker, she said, I don't know how you think as one individual you're going to be able to move from that place. And she said, get ready to get rid of your stuff and go to California. What do you want to sell, Vi? I said, what do you want to buy? So she bought my whole living room set plus the TV and a couple of other things. And then Olga bought, she bought my little yellow table and the 2 chairs I had in the kitchen at Mrs. Dale's, and a couple of other things I gave away. And so I felt I did very good. And then some friend of mine took Olga and Margaret and me to the airport, and your mother met me in California.
Now, when we were in, we should state this too, that there were 6 of us living in a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment at the time. There was you and Candy in the 1 bedroom. I guess Mom slept on the couch, and
Yes.
Scott and I were in the other bedroom. And then Candy got married, and we moved to Temple City.
Yeah,
and you stayed with us there for a while, and then you moved across the street and took care of the Mossman's house.
Yes.
And one morning, about 6 o'clock in the morning, we all got up, and it wasn't by the alarm clock. And that was the first one you ever felt, wasn't it?
That was the earthquake that destroyed more than half of the Veterans Hospital in Sylmar.
1971 earthquake.
Yeah, that was, boy, I'm telling you, that was something. And I said, I thought the shape of the bedroom changed from square to oblong. And the bed kept shaking, and I said to myself, I'm getting dressed. I'm not going out and get caught out in that street in pajamas. See, I didn't know if it was an earthquake or what was going on. And I looked across, and I saw a light in your mother's house, and I was dressed, and out through the back door, and I ran across the street. And your mother said, I never saw you so white in my life, Ma. Oh, I said, what was that? She said, that was an earthquake, Mother. That's what an earthquake is. I said, you got a good strong cup of coffee. I need it.
That was right after Mom and Ed were married.
Yeah.
I think it was February 11th, and they were married on 22nd, so about 3 weeks later.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that, and I try to tell people, after you've existed through the first one, the rest don't, you know what's coming, and that's it. And there have been several.
Okay, let's see, there's a couple other things. Now, I guess about 1972 or 73, you started taking care of people again.
Yeah.
No, I think at this time we should also mention that you were already approximately 70 years of age, about 5 years beyond where most people retire.
Yes, that's true.
And how many people did you take care of after you started then? The first person was Zola, and the last person was
Mrs. Kimball.
Who also became a very close friend of yours.
Yes.
How many years did that span that you took care of people?
19 and a half years, those 9 different people. And Mrs. Kimball was the last one, and I was with her 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, now, would that include when you stayed with the Mossmans also?
everybody.
Yes. Okay,
That
so,
includes everybody,
so
honey.
that actually would go back into your late 60s. Then.
Yes.
And you didn't stop working then until you were
85 and a half years old.
85 and a half years old.
I went back to California for one woman who, she always said, if anything happens to me, would you come take care of me? Well, I went back, but it turned out to be a job of what we would call sour grapes. I stayed 2 months, long enough to pay my airfare back.
Mm-hmm.
And then I came back to, I left and I said, that's it. I have just made up my mind. while I am still well, I'm going to say no. Now, I mean, if any one of my people were sick, Tom, and needed extensive care, I'd be the first one there. I will never say no to my own people. But for the other, honey, I think I have filled my life up.
I think you have too. Some of the people you took care of, one was an alcoholic.
Yes.
Okay. One was an elderly man who was in a wheelchair.
Yes.
And I think then you took care of Bernice.
Yes.
The third one, and she had a couple of dogs that were a bit of a character.
Yes.
Okay. And then I kind of.
Then there was a couple of short ones in between, but insofar as I know, dear, every one of my cases have died.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not my fault.
No.
I was told when I took them on that they had had a slight stroke, but you couldn't leave them alone, and their people couldn't always come and stay with them. So that's why I was taken in, because each one had given a good recommendation of the care they got. So it worked out very good for me.
Then, let's see, there was Bernice, who you kind of ran the gamut there on Del Mar Ave, because you took care of
Yeah,
Bernice.
and Sis wrote, and she says, is everybody sick on Del Mar? What kind of a street is it? So I wrote and said, well, they have lived here a long time, and something happens one way or the other, and they cannot be left alone. And yet there were days when I thought they were just as well as I was. But you see, you never know when a stroke is going to strike.
Right.
And they had all had slight strokes.
Right. Well, first there was Bernice, and then she passed away.
Yeah.
And you went down and worked for Mrs. Fisher.
Fisher.
And that's when you met Mrs. Kimball.
Yes.
And then probably, what was it, 3-4 years you worked with Mrs. Kimball?
Yes.
And
I met Mrs. Kimball, but when I came back to work
she
for
lived
her,
next door to
yeah, she lived next
Ella
door
Fisher.
to. Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
She was very good to you.
Oh, Tom, she was better to me than my own sister, and that's saying a lot. Yes, she said to me a couple of times, I don't know what I would have ever done without you, Vi. Well, I said, you remember one time when we talked in the backyard when I'd gone out with garbage? She always came out to talk to me from her house, because Mr. Kimball had died. She said, you know, Vi, she said, if it wasn't for making bad neighbors, she said, I would ask you to come and stay with me. I said, so what? I do my job wherever I am, honey, and don't you worry about it. But I said, I will tell you this, Helen, if you ever need me, no matter where I am, I'll quit and I'll come and stay with you. And when I found out about her terrible accident, and then she had this one friend from Wisconsin come and stay till they took the cast off of her leg. And then I came, and she said to me twice, I don't know, Vi, what I would have ever done without you. She said, you are quiet and nice and pleasant. She said, we have a lot of laughs together. You're a good cook. And she said, you like to shop and I don't. And no, she was a wonderful person. I can never say anything about her but what was good. And her daughter still writes to me.
And another nice thing I think is that for the most part, all of these homes that you took care of the people in were rather nice houses.
Yes, they were.
They were all,
yes, even the two short ones in between. You know, a couple of those names I can't remember. I don't even remember the first name, but they were short, each like 4 or 5 months, and that was the end.
So now you're really retired.
Yeah.
20 years beyond about what most people do.
Yes.
You seem to be in good health.
I hope.
And I guess we're all looking forward to seeing you just as well as you are now at 100. Somebody doing math could figure out, but would you tell us how old you are now?
87.
87, and you don't seem like a day over 57 in
Going
energy.
on. But I have traced the ancestry back on the English side of the family, Tom, and I still have my father's youngest daughter living, Victoria Grisdale, lives in Kendall. She's 92. Rebecca is 94. She's still living. There's Marjorie. No, Hilda died. There's Marjorie, who's in her late 80s. And one of their brothers is still living, and he's in his late 80s. But it seems like all the women live to be pretty close to...
It seems like there's longevity on the Bentley side of the family and short lifespan on the Tribull side of the family.
Yeah, well, it seems that way.
It does.
Yeah, it seems that way. I don't know why that is, but it just seems like that's the way it's going.
There's a couple of things that in history now. You were born literally at the turn of the century.
That's
and
right.
this is the industrial age. And, you know, you talk to kids today about people used to sit around and listen to the radio, and they scratched their heads looking at their stereo TVs with their VCRs and everything. But you've really seen life go from the horse and buggy age to putting people on the moon.
Right.
And you've seen an awful lot. I think, see, if somebody was talking about living from 1801 to 1899, they would never see much difference
no,
like you've seen.
Never, Tom. It's been like an explosion, a sudden explosion that has brought all this new stuff forward. And I guess in the end, eventually, it will prove itself. I hope to feel that it will prove itself.
Are you marveled by, I guess anybody would be marveled by all this technology.
Yes.
However, do you see where, okay, an example, television, to turn on and see pictures, something like that, to be able to watch a movie in your own home,
Mm-hmm.
Thoroughly amazing. But has it also taken anything away? Has it robbed the family life of anything? The conversation?
I think,
What's
now
the deterrent of all this technology that you see?
I think that with a few exceptions, Tom, families aren't as close as they used to be. See, we were a very close-knit family. And, of course, Dad was when he was in England, and Mother had a lot of people in this country, even though they came from someplace else. They were very close-knit, and one helped the other if there was a trial came. See, that's the way they were. People don't sit and talk at the table after meal like we did last night in the restaurant. We did that at home, and nobody was in a hurry. The dishes got done, honey, but nobody was in a hurry to get up and put them out in the kitchen. I think of course, there are families who still hold to those old traditions. I think that's nice. And I always felt I was glad I belonged to that time. I don't think, Tom, that this hurry, hurry, hurry is good.
Mm-hmm. Now, back around the early times, the early 1900s, 1920s, people did not work an 8-hour day sometimes. Sometimes they work longer, 10 or 12 hours possibly.
My father worked 12 hours a day from 6 in the morning till 6 at night.
And how many days a week was that?
6 days a week.
6 days a week. Yet there still seemed to be more time for things. There seemed to be more time to be together.
Yes.
I think it's the technology, the fact that somebody where perhaps you'd go see them go visit an old friend once a year, and that time was quality time because
Yes,
you'd
it
sit
was.
down and talk with them. Today you can jump in your car and you can race over there and be there in an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you see them, it's like, well, you can always come back. Or when you get
Yes.
done eating, we jump up and we turn on the TV. It's made a difference. I guess I'll look back at myself and see this is my own life, and all the new things that come along in the future And my kids won't understand my time either.
Yes, Tom, your time will be very, well, what shall I say? All these things I've been telling you, there's a lot I couldn't put in, but there were many, many beautiful things in between. There were sorrows, but there was always joy that came afterwards in some shape or form. And it will be the same with you. Say, well, you're 30 now. Well, I'll give you the advantage of 30 more years. I'll put it that way, because in the next 30 years, what you think is fast today will be like lightning in those next 30 years to come. And then I'm wondering if there will be an end to that kind of hurry. What will come that will shut that off?
Hopefully something.
Something has to let go, Tom. I'll put it that way without sounding dramatic. Something has to let go. Will it be man's inability to think ahead any differently or any faster, or will his mind just go blank? It will have been used up.
Any predictions? Any predictions for the next century?
Well, I have wondered about, well, I just read in the paper the other day, when you call on the phone, you're going to see who you're talking to, and that's coming. And I'm wondering if it's always going to be good.
You get an obscene phone call.
Yeah. What do you do then? Well, like, I'll just say this to you because this was funny. The phone had rang about 15 times this day in early evening at Aunt Sis and Uncle Tom. And they went out and they said they didn't think there would be any phone calls. Well, they were out 15 minutes, the phone rang. Well, it was kind of getting dark outside. Picked up the phone. Hello? I never identified myself ever. Hello? Hello? Hello, are you there? A lot of giggling, like kids. So they mumbled something, and I said, I can't quite understand what you said. Would you mind repeating it? Did you wish to speak to Dr. Tom Ladani or not? See, he is a doctor of whatever. And they started to give me a lot of garbage. And I said, look, bud, buzz off. And that phone went down so quick, wherever they were. So when Tom and Sis came in about 8 o'clock, because I'd gone in, scrubbed my teeth, and was going to go to bed. And I told them about it, and I said, I said, I don't know who they were, but I think it was a bunch of kids, and they were giving me a lot of garbage, and I couldn't get any sense out of them. So I said, Tom, I just told him, listen, bud, buzz off. And he said, you said it? That's just how I said it, and I said, they hung up.
Okay, I got a couple more questions for you. You ever drive a car in your life?
Yes, I did.
You did? Did you enjoy it?
Huh?
Did you enjoy it, or did you feel it was a
Well,
lot to do?
my husband took me down on a street, a kind of an empty street by the railroad in Rahway, and he was going to teach me to drive. And I'd go about 5 feet, and he'd say, that's not right, you didn't shift right. And he kept it up and kept it up. And I'm trying to keep my patience because I wanted to learn how to drive. I turned around, I made too big a curve, and then he started at me all the way down. So I said, I'd like to go home. He says, well, you're going to drive home. And I said, but I don't want you nagging me. Just let me go. I know when to put my foot on the brake. And I know how far to stop from a car. And I know how to signal. So we got home. And my husband said, I'm not taking you out anymore. So my dad said to me, I'll take you out. See, my dad was quiet like I am. So the next day and the next day and the next day, my father took me. And I did exactly as I'd been told to do, and my father once in a while would correct me in a quiet way. And finally he said, I don't know why you can't go take your street test. He said, you're doing fine. So, but he said, you let your husband take you. So we went up to Elizabeth, and we went out. My husband got out, and this other guy got in. Drive down 5 blocks. I drove down. Now make a right turn. I said, I can't. I said, you're not allowed to turn on a red light. Good, he said, you learned your lessons, didn't you? Light turned green. He said, drive down 5 more blocks. He pulled the same thing on me. Well, he took me around the square and then brought me back. And then he took me down some other place and he said, now I want you to back into that space. And I did real good and pulled out, and he said, well, you can have your license.
So you got your license.
So I got my license. So we went to Westfield one day, and I drove. Coming back, we came down Westfield Avenue, and then you cross St. George, and you're on Grand Avenue in Rahway, and we had to stop for the lights. And the goddamn car, what do you call it when it won't go?
Installed.
It's stalled. Well, of course, that's a busy intersection, you know. I couldn't get the car to start, and Richard is carrying on and carrying on and I said, I'm getting out of the car, and I said, you drive it home the rest of the way. I said, I won't have nobody talking to me like that. Does the car stall for you? Lots of times. You never heard me say anything. I figured you were driving. I wasn't going to tell you nothing. You knew. So I got out, walked around the car, and he slid over and got in the driver's seat. He said, would you ever do that again? I will. I said, if you talk to me like that, Richard. I said, I am a human being. I said, when Mr. Olson in Perth Amboy, when you worked in the Perth Amboy dry docks down there, he told you you had to learn to drive the company car. I said, did he swear at you? Did he talk to you the way you talk to me? No. Well, then I said, remember, I said, I'm your wife. And so, off and on, I got the car, but then he had to use it to go back and forth to work, honey. And so I never really got to have the car. But I kept getting my driver's license until finally I said, look, I can walk to the corner and catch a bus. I can go to New York on the express bus by walking to the corner. I can get on a bus and go to Perth Amboy or Woodbridge or anything. So while I got my driver's license, I really didn't have much use of the car.
Okay, I'm running out of videotape. We got a little bit left, but I'm going to relay some stories to you, and just maybe if I err, you could correct me. There was a time when you went somewhere in the car and you got 14 flats and the headlights went out and you were using flashlights. And how many miles was that whole trip entail?
We went to Camden, New Jersey, and everything was fine. And coming back, we had 14 flats. Stopped once to buy retreaded tires, thinking we could get home. And something else happened, and my sister hung out one window, and I hung out the other one in the back. And we both had flashlights. And Richard came home that way by flashlight.
Quite a trip.
Back roads, I'm telling you, Tom, we didn't travel any of the main roads. We found back ways to get home. And when we got home, you could have whipped him. He was so upset because everything had gone wrong with the car.
I could imagine. What was the term in mileage on the way home? How many miles was it to home?
Well, I would say from Rahway to Camden, New Jersey, we didn't go all the way on roads. We had to go through town. So I would say it was a good 100 miles.
100 miles, 14 flats.
Yeah.
I think I've had 2 flats in my life, and I've probably driven close to 100,000 miles. Okay, let's see. I'm just going to, again, like I said, I'm going to try and recollect stories that you've told me.
Yeah, that's the truth, Tom.
So that, now you used to have we can't go into too much detail, but used to have some pets, a cat and a dog.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Timmy the cat, that Aunt Sis pulled out of a garbage can, put it under a raincoat and brought it home. It was a little bit of a thing. The dogs had molded to death. And we got it well with salve, ointment, and olive oil and thing. And then some little girl came to the front door one day. The kids knew her, and she had a dear little white dog. And she said, "You can have the dog if you want." You know, imagine someone come to the door like that. So I said, "Oh, it's a cute little dog. It's really cute." So we took them all in, the kids too, and she left the dog. And about an hour later, the doorbell rang, and the two girls are back. And she said, "My mother said you have to give us back the dog. That you don't give people things like that." So I said, "That's all right, honey." So I went and got the dog, and I gave it back to her. They were gone about 20 minutes, and they come back. And she said, "My mother says when you give something, it has to stay given." So I said, "We can have the little dog again." So we had Butcher Boy, 14 and a half years, and Timmy the cat that Sis pulled out of the garbage can was solid black and just had a white butterfly over his eyes and nose. We had Timmy 9 and a half years, and he wouldn't stay where we moved, even though we took him in a bag at night. So he always went back to Aunt Sarah next door, and she finally called and said, "Let Timmy stay here." Bye, she said, "because I feel like I got a part of the Tribull family with me." So I offered to send money down. "No," she said, "we'll just keep the cat," she said. "Now he's our cat."
Now, so there was some family member who was in the hospital, and I guess they eventually died there or something.
My father.
And is that where you put the bow on Butch the dog and snuck him into the hospital?
The Alexian Brothers Hospital in Elizabeth, New Jersey is way out at the end of the big long street. You could take the bus to the main street and get off, but you had to walk. So my father kept asking about the dog because he was very fond of dogs. They had them in England. They had the Manx cats, you know, that his father brought from the Isle of Man. And he wanted to see Butch. So I asked the brothers if we could bring the dog, and he said, "Yes, but keep him so that he doesn't run around." Oh, I said, "We do that." So Sis took him out, and she gave him a bath and brushed him all up and put a big green bow on him and a little bell. And we stopped at the desk downstairs, and we showed the brothers the dog. And I said, "And I remember you said we can't leave him run." So we went up the big stairway to where Dad's room was, and we showed him the dog, you know, inside of the coat. Well, he was so thrilled when he saw that. His face broke out, and the other men looked, "A dog? A dog?" So we had to take the dog all around for the men to pet. And then we put Butch down on Papa's bed, and I said to him, "And I don't want you to bark. Don't you dare to make any noise. Grandpa," I says, "is sick." And you know that dog knew what I said. And he just went up and laid his head on Dad's shoulder, and my father hugged him like he would of a kid. And that dog never made one bit of noise. But all the brothers that were nurses on that, because there were no women in that hospital, they came up and they came over and they looked at the dog, and they said to the other brothers at the desk said we could bring the dog in for Dad to see. And they stood out in the hall and they laughed and they talked and back and forth. And finally, our 2 hours was up. And Dad said, "Oh, I'm so glad they let you bring the dog in." So we put him under to go down, because we had to walk in the hall and all the way down the stairway. And I thanked them. And they always made a fuss over the girls because they thought they were twins. So
Okay.
I thanked them, and I thought that was a nice thing to do. And my dad was very, very happy. He had seen the dog.
This is a story, and I only know it through Scotty, because Scotty told it to me once or twice. I guess, again, I don't know who the people were, but I guess some people in the family, if I'm not mistaken, they were late to dinner one night, and it was because they had been imbibing a little bit, and you were mad at them, and something about you pulled the tablecloth and the food went flying. Is that a true story?
That's a true story.
Tell me a little, not in too much detail, but
No,
I find it kind of humorous
I'll
in
hurry
retrospect.
it up. My mother had died,
Uh-huh.
and after I took care of her for almost 2 years, I quit a good job to take care of Mama. And she had died, and she was buried in New Camden, where my brother and my father are buried now. And the consequence was that, see, I had been so close to Mama that when she died, there was something that left me. So I said to Richard, I have to go to the cemetery. I said, I have to go to the cemetery. I've got to go once to the grave by myself and talk to Mama. So we got in a train and we went to Camden and then took a thing out. And I left a note for my father and told him why I had to go. I said, I just had to go and talk to Mama alone, Dad. So we came back the very next day, and I was home in time to make a nice supper, set the table real nice like I always did, and I wondered why my father wasn't home. So I looked out, and here's my father coming along the street, weaving in and out, and I knew he was drunk. I knew it. And what bothered me is the neighbors would have seen it. So he came in and he said, that's a hell of a thing to do, he said. Go and leave. Dad, I said, I left a note and I told you why. I'm sorry if it upset you, but I said, I feel much better for having gone and talked to Mama all by myself. So I said, now I have a nice supper already. I said, let's sit down and eat and enjoy it. And then my father started on me, this and this and this and this. I said, so that's how you feel about it? Look, Dad, I never get really angry in my life, but I said, for once in my life, I want you to know that I have a right to express my own feelings instead of hiding them all the time. I said, she was my mother, and I had to talk to her. Even though she was dead, I had to talk to her by myself and let her know how much I missed her. I said, and you will not stand there, I said, and talk to me like that. I said, you're loaded to the gills, you're drunk, you don't know what you're saying. And with that, I took the table cover, and all the dishes and the food went all over the floor. And with that, whatever it was that was tied up tight inside of me left. I had been unjustifiably condemned for something that my heart was breaking over. So, cleaned it all up. I cleaned it all up, and I set the table again. And my father had gone upstairs and laid down and went to sleep. But I sat down and I ate the next supper that I cooked. But I always felt, Tom, that I was justified in being angry.
All different facets of life cross our path, don't they?
Yeah, and that's the truth about that one. But it never happened again. But the book I'm reading, I listened to Dr. Schuler from Garden Grove, and he said to buy this book, Faith for the Journey. And that man is a minister in a big Presbyterian church in Seattle, Washington. And he tells you, you are allowed to get angry when a cause presents itself. You are allowed to cry. You are allowed to express your own opinion, as long as you keep it within reason.
Let's move on to, okay.
And I only have this one thing to say. It won't go on there, will it?
Well, you can tell me later.
I'll tell you later.
Okay.
But you'll understand, Tom, that I was always a quiet person. I love to laugh, and I love to hear a funny story, and I'll laugh with anybody or go any place they want to go to a funny movie. But that was the one time when I felt like I had been pushed to the limit.
We all get that way.
Yeah.
I don't think you knew about this. Well, let me start the story maybe in the middle and work backwards. about 2 or 3 years, well, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I called you on the phone, and at that time I had asked you a little bit about family history.
Yeah.
I don't know if you recall that or not. I think you were living at Rick's at the time. Anyway.
Maybe I was. I don't
Anyway, I
remember.
called you and I talked to you. I wanted to know a little bit about family history, and the reason was, and part of the reason I'm videotaping you now is that it was a history class, and the teacher said, you know, sit down and talk to your relatives, talk to your grandparents, because they're the ones who know the family history.
Mm-hmm.
And so rather than write this long, detailed, you know, well, this, that, and the other, you know, almost as if you're doing just a basic biography on somebody, I wrote about you, and I wrote stories about you. Little thing, I wrote about how the horses were electrocuted when you were born.
Yes, yes.
And one of the stories I wrote about, and I don't think you knew I was there at the time. We were living in an apartment on California Street in San Gabriel, and it was Rick's 21st birthday.
Yes.
And just for the people who are going to watch this tape later, Rick had been over to Vietnam twice, and he came back and he was in Salina, Kansas. And you wanted to call him on his birthday and wish him a happy 21st birthday. And
I did.
And you were in the kitchen, and you couldn't see me sitting on the couch, but I was quite bemused listening to you. You called the base, and you kept insisting that you talk to somebody till they let you talk to your grandson.
I called the operator on the telephone.
And as I recall, you had to go. You at least, I don't know if you had to go this far, but you insisted on talking to the commander of the camp because you were going to talk to your grandson.
On his 21st birthday, because I said to him, no, I talked to the operator and she connected me with somebody and gave me the number. And she called and she connected me, and the fourth time they connected me with the base in Fort Riley, Kansas. And the guy at the gate, and I said, I'd like to speak to the commander. I said, my grandson, Rick Young, I said, it's his 21st birthday, and I'm his grandmother, and I said, I don't think anybody will think to call him. And I said, I must call him and wish him a happy birthday. May I speak to his commander? And the guy at the gate says, you sure can. And then the commander answered, and I said, may I please speak to Rick Young? It's his 21st birthday, and he's my grandson. I'm his grandma. And I said, I don't think anybody will think to call him. And I said, but I want to talk to Rick Young. So he said, well, wait just a minute. So Rick had just gone off duty, and he was tired. I guess he'd been walking the wall all night, he said. So he got on the phone, and I said, happy birthday, honey. I said, I don't know if anybody would think to call you, but you're 21 today. And I said, Grandma thought about your 21st birthday, and happy birthday, honey. So he said, Grandma, he said, you know what, I can't talk to you long, but he said, I'll call you tonight at 11 o'clock, and then we'll talk. And we talked for a whole hour.
Okay. I'm running real short on tape here. There's just a few things that I want to clip by. I wish, you know, I could have had a camera on you all the time you were here to get everything that you had said. Let's see. Well, we'll do this at the very end. You got to see my dad.
Yes,
a year before he died.
Yes, I did.
See, I didn't see him. Last time I remember seeing my dad was probably about 1972. Just tell me, you know, how he looked. And
Well, I was staying with Rick then, because it was from there that I went to Mrs. Kimball after her accident. And I don't know. I don't think they knew your dad was coming, because we had to hurry up and make things. But the doorbell rang, and Rick's wife went to the door, and it was your dad. And the lady, her name was May.
May, right.
Yeah. And they were there, and they came up the stairway like you had to in Rick's house. And your father said to me, hello, Mom, for heaven's sakes, he said, what brings you out into this neck of the woods? Well, I said, I got here, John, and I said, I'm only visiting because I said, I stopped off to see the children while they were here because I wanted to see where they were living. So, and he introduced me. He just said this was May, and I acknowledged, and I was nice to her. Why shouldn't I be nice to everybody? So Linda said to me, we got to hurry up and make lunch. So I peeled potatoes and got them ready, and we made potato salad. And I don't know if she went out or she already had it in the fridge, but we had ham and cheese and bread, and we had the potato salad and hot tea, and I think there was some kind of cake there. But we all sat down and we had a nice lunch. And then finally, after they talked a lot, I said to your father, gee, John, I said, you know what, wouldn't you know, I said, Mom don't have film in her camera. I said, I sure would like to take a picture of you. You know, I said, you look better than I ever saw you look in your life. Your father had weight in his face. He was filled out here more, you know, because he was very, very slim. And
That was after he had had the heart attack. And
yes, and we talked about generalities, and then they got ready to go. And like you had to go down the steps to go out the front door. And your father said, it sure was nice seeing you, Ma. I said, well, me too. I said, I always enjoy meeting all the people I know, no matter when or where it is. And he said, well, take care. He said, maybe I'll see you again. I said, maybe you will, John. It's hard to tell where I'll be the next time. And he just shook his hands and he said, enjoy yourself. And the lady did too. And they were gone.
No, you know what?
And I was glad I got to see John. And I told her, I said, wouldn't you know your dumb mother, I said, wouldn't have a roll of film in her camera, which I usually had. I said, I would have taken a picture of John because I said, Laura, he looked wonderful.
You know, when we used to talk to my dad on the phone sometimes, you know, he'd say, ask how you were, or, you know, where you were and how you were and whatnot. And I'd say she hasn't changed, and he joked and says, "I think she's going to outlive us all." Well, at least in his case, that you have. Okay, real quickly, because I got just very little tape left here. What do you think the greatest invention is that you've seen over the course of your lifetime?
All the years.
Mm-hmm.
The greatest invention. I would mention two, Tom, because I call it an invention. The car and the trip to the moon. A man was put on the moon, and you can't fool the kids and tell them it's made out of green cheese. But there is a man in the moon. If you look, you'll see him. I think those two things have made. And you could put another one in, the advancement in medicines today to help people. I think I would put those three things uppermost in my mind.
Okay. I think we're just going to finish this off now by, you know, we're here at my house. I'm Tom Witt. For those of you who are watching this hundreds of years in the future, on 653 Irving Drive in Thousand Oaks. And today is May 30th, 1988.
Right.
And my grandma's here. She's going to go visit and stay with my mom in Texas. She'd come down from Washington and shortly of Idaho with my Aunt Sis. And she came down this week and got to see her first great-grandson graduate from high school.
Good. That's very nice. And it certainly was a joy. This visit has turned out to be a wonderful, marvelous surprise. And I hope that those who watch this later in years will appreciate the fact that I am glad that I live to be an old lady.
Well, it sure is something else, isn't it?
I am. A lot of people say, oh, why are you so glad about being old? I said, I don't stop to think of it only when I get a crick in my hand or my foot or my hip. Otherwise, I don't. Being 87 doesn't, I don't think about it unless somebody asks me.
Well, we're all, like I said before, we're looking forward to seeing you see the 21st century and to be 100 years old.
I really pray that I can live for the family reunion, because Aunt Sis's Keith said to me, am I invited to that, Grandma? He said, I didn't get to the other one. I said, you sure are, and I'm telling you right now, come. So I'm hoping he'll come. So that's that's the sum and substance of everything. And there will be a lot of little ones will be bigger, and the bigger ones will be older.
A lot more great-grandkids.
And yeah, a lot more. Oh, I think it's wonderful. I just do. And thank you so much, Tom, for giving me this privilege of being able to sit and actually talk and tell about some of the things that have passed in my life.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it.
It's been real.
I
this
really
is something
enjoyed it.
that I had always wanted to do.
I think it's wonderful.
Especially since that class that I took, you know, and I began to realize that my father's parents died, I believe, before I was born.
Yes.
And that my grandfather died before I was born. And so the only real link way back into the past has been you.
Well, that's nice to know. I'm sorry I didn't know your folks before your mom married your father, but we all got together anyway. I always enjoyed it. I really have, let's see, born in Pennsylvania, lived in New Jersey, worked in New York, traveled to California, came back for Rick's wedding when he got out of the service.
Well, Graham, what do you think about watching yourself on TV?
Is that the way I look to everybody?
That's the way you look.
I'm really telling somebody something, aren't I, huh?
You probably never even thought TV'd be invented, much less see yourself.
Never, never expected.